an amazing treat for you. We have Ben Goertzel, who is the world's leading expert in artificial intelligence. He's been working in AI for the past 30 years. You can find his interviews all over the internet. He's got millions of views talking about AI and how AI is going to change the future, and kind of what we want to be thinking about now as far as how to program AI with compassion so that way the machines are good to us when they get smarter than us. So he's just a genius in this area, and he's going to come and share with us some things that he doesn't ordinarily talk about on his standard interviews. And so we're so delighted and grateful to have you, Ben. And so let's see. Oh, great. So you just unmuted yourself. Do you want to test out your mic here?
Testing 1, 2, infinity.
Fantastic. You sound great, and I'll let you take over.
All right, awesome. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And yeah, as you just said in the intro, you know, my primary career is artificial intelligence, and in particular artificial general intelligence, trying to build machines that can really think like people, which has a lot of different dimensions, right? I mean, there's the learning and reasoning algorithms, there's what experiences do you give the AI, there's the distributed infrastructure that you provide to the AI. And I've been working on all these different aspects of artificial general intelligence from a theoretical view and also an experimental empirical view for many decades now. And I've given a lot of talks about AGI. You can find a lot of them on YouTube. I did an interview with Lex Friedman not long ago, which is like 4 hours long, digging into artificial general intelligence. So since this is the Camp Mystic rather than the technical AI gathering, I'm gonna take the liberty to talk about some different stuff which connects with AI and AGI, but also goes a lot further out there. And you know, actually, when I started working on AGI, that was pretty far out there, right? Like when I was doing my PhD work in the 1980s, or before that, when I was a kid in the 1970s, first learning about AI and how to do AI research, like you couldn't do research on artificial general intelligence or human level AI, I mean, without being laughed at, right? It wasn't something you talked about in the university seminar room. It was something that you talked about, you know, in the bar after a lot of beer out in the street after smoking some joints, right? It wasn't something serious. Now, of course, AI is big business, and AGI is a recognized pursuit being worked on by large corporations and you know, even known by leaders of large governments. So not that we've achieved general intelligence yet, far from it, but we're, you know, the pursuit of artificial general intelligence is now not considered an insane crackpot delusion, but it's considered a serious, albeit a bit risky and adventurous science and engineering pursuit. And you know, having seen that transition is interesting. It's fascinating. It's amazing in some ways to see something you were working on for so long, like out in the margins, becoming mainstream and more accepted. It also, you know, it gives me some faith that some other wacky things I've been thinking about and working on for a long time, given a little more time, that these could become mainstream and accepted, you know, even not that long from now, like within my own lifetime. I mean, just as AGI has gone from the wilderness to the mainstream, you know, what's going to be next? So I'm gonna talk now for the next half hour or so about some crazier stuff, which I think does connect back into AGI, but in ways that many of my AGI colleagues may not quite be ready to accept. So I'm going to talk about consciousness and the subjective experience of consciousness from a broader perspective than the, physicalist, reductionist perspective, which is most commonplace in the AI field. And I'm going to also talk a bit about psi phenomena, what are called paranormal phenomena, like ESP, precognition, even reincarnation, and the existence of individual minds potentially beyond the physical existence of their bodies in this universe. And these are topics that are very much on the margins of scientific inquiry right now, just as AGI was when I started out in the AGI field. But I think they are ultimately real phenomena that will be brought into the fold of science, although perhaps expanding and changing our understanding of science as they're brought into the fold of science. And I also think they're going to wind up to be relevant to AGI and the singularity. Now, I don't think we need to think about psychic phenomena and consciousness actually to build a human level thinking machine. I think we can just write software code on distributed network of computers. On the other hand, to understand the minds of these human level AIs that we build, and to understand the transition from human level AGI to artificial superintelligence. Now, that for that we may indeed need some broader thinking and to incorporate some additional threads that are not normally being considered in the AI context. So I'm gonna pause a moment to share my screen here if I can. Let's see.
You should have access as co-host. It should just be down at the bottom.
Yeah. It seems to be working. There we go. All right. Is the screen share working all right?
Yes.
Beautiful. So yeah, let me. So this presentation, you can see the title. We're looking at consciousness and psi in biological and artificial systems. So we're thinking about human brains, and then we're thinking about AGI system. And Euryphysics is a word I made up because metaphysics was already taken with some meanings that weren't exactly what it meant. So Eury is a prefix that means wide, which is how Europe got its name. Europe is the wide land containing a bunch of sub-countries, right? So talking about a wider universe than we're normally concerned with in physics, a universe able to contain consciousness, paranormal phenomena, the mind in general, yet a universe that still may be comprehensible using mathematical, logical, and scientific means. So this slide shows actually what I'm not going to talk about much now. So what I usually talk about is when I'm speechifying to audiences face to face or on Zoom or similar more often lately, is concrete efforts to build thinking machines using digital software, right? And I'm working on open source project OpenCog and the new generation of that called OpenCog Hyperon, a project called True AGI, which uses OpenCog to control humanoid robots and smart devices. We're working with Hanson Robotics on the Sophia robot and follow up AGI robots, for example, nursing robots aimed at the medical space, with Singularity Net working on like a decentralized blockchain-based platform for running AIs decentralized across many different machines owned by many different people. So I mean, this is real software being built by teams of great programmers around the world, and it's very cool. It's very deep. I've talked about it a bunch before. Now the goal of all this is not just to build cool software in the sense of Microsoft Word or Mathematica or Excel, or even in the sense of, say, AlphaGo. I mean, the goal of all this is to build something that's fully a mind and experiencing, world creating, self creating, socially connecting mind in the same sense that you and I are minds. And of course, there's philosophical and conceptual issues here on which there is no consensus in the scientific or philosophical community. Like, can we type a bunch of computer code, run it on a bunch of machines, and then have those machines actually be a mind? Or is what makes us humans minds, is it fundamentally different than anything that's running in these computer programs? And in a sense, you don't need to solve these conceptual questions to create an AGI. I mean, any more than Picasso had to solve the theory of beauty to paint a beautiful painting, or you need to solve the philosophy of time in order to do experiments involving special relativity and time dilation, right? I mean, we're building stuff and doing stuff all the time involving complex concepts and aspects of the universe that we don't really fully understand and may never fully understand within the limitations of our human brains. But hold on a moment. Brief real life interrupt. Let me continue here. So I'm going to talk about some of these aspects of what is a mind, and how could a digital computer become a mind. I mean, this is wacky stuff, and some folks have advised me not to bother to go into this because I've got enough trouble still fighting the battles of getting AGI created. But I mean, the same impulse that led me to go into AGI, the same impulse that led a whole long series of other crazy people to think about AGI back to Leibniz, who first thought of the idea of applying logic and probability to the mind, and who had an amazing hairstyle. I'm afraid it was just a wig, but I'm still in awe of it. So, my PhD was in math, and I'm gonna start by talking a little about some math I think can be useful for modeling conscious experience, and then bring that back to physics and to AI and to the subjective aspects of conscious experience. So there's something in math called hypersets, or non-foundational sets, non-foundational recursion. And I think in some ways this can be a good model of conscious experience. So I mean, a non-foundational set is a set that can contain itself as an element. So it's like a bottomless recursion. The thing inside the set is the same as the thing outside the set, right? And I mean, if you've taken certain psychedelics, you may have seen an awful lot of structures of this nature, but there's also some solid math behind it. I mean, you can have a set X containing itself as an element. You can have one set containing an Ezra as an element that contains the first set as an element, and The book The Liar I recommend from the 80s goes over this in a lot of detail. So you can give interesting models of things like consciousness and will and self this way. You can say, well, reflective consciousness is the correlation of reflective consciousness with something else. So it's a recursive definition that doesn't bottom out, right? And you can keep digging the fractal down deeper and deeper and deeper. And you know, this as a physical model runs into interesting issues because quantum theory gives you a minimum size for stuff, but as a mathematical model, it's clear and straightforward. And free will as an experience, again, setting aside traditional physics, free will you could view this way, like free will, an act of free will consists of a recognized causation between an act of free will and some effect. So again, it's recursive. It's a bottomless fractal that never resolves. And the self can be the same way. I mean, recognizing yourself is the correlation between yourself and your perceptions and experiences. So again, it's a recursive self-referential thing, and you can model this using some funky math. I mean, you can look at infinite order probability distributions. So probabilities of probabilities of probabilities of probabilities of probabilities forever and never bottoming out. And there are formal models of computing in these boundless recursive settings, which are called hypercomputation. Now, you couldn't build a hypercomputer in the current physical universe. On the other hand, the current physical universe isn't necessarily the ground truth, right? The current physical universe, as we call it, is a model of some of our experiences, not necessarily a perfect model. So you have some funky computers like the Zeno machine, where each computation it does is done twice as fast as the previous one, so it can do an infinite number of computations in a finite time. And again, there's nice solid math papers about all these things. And you know, if you assume you had a mind that understands these hypercomputable entities, then that mind may find that these bottomless recursions are the simplest way to model itself. And interestingly, like if I have a mind with a hypercomputable oracle in it, so I can see things that are bottomless recursions beyond the normal domain of physics and computing. And if you have a mind with a hypercomputable oracle in it, you know, perhaps we could exchange information. We could even create symbols. Like I could say, like, this pen, you know, represents a certain hypercomputable entity to me, and you might recognize it as such, even though that hypercomputable entity goes beyond any configuration of molecules. And you know, this in the end, I used a pen, but this is like the wordless transmission of the Buddha, who held up a flower to a seeker, and as they communally looked at that flower, they saw something going far beyond the flower, but shared between their subjective experiences, right? And we can model all this in math using hypercomputability. Now that's all pretty abstract. Let me turn to some very real phenomena that may connect to this in some ways. So there's substantial evidence that things like ESP, precognition, psychokinesis, remote viewing, and so on, that these are real phenomena. And I edited a book on this with Damian Broderick a few years ago, The Evidence for Psi. It's a pretty dry book going over a lot of experimental designs and statistical evidence. But I mean, the reason I helped put the book together was to have something basically to show open-minded people with a science and data-oriented background, you know, to show them that there's some solid data underlying these phenomena, even though there's also a lot of random bullshit being said about them here and there. And Another solid book, Extrasensory Perception, you could look up. I mean, there's actually huge scientific literature on this stuff in published journals and so forth, although not commonly recognized. And yeah, I don't have time to go over all the data for that now. I mean, it's annoying, like some experiments succeed, some experiments fail. It's not really much more annoying than like social psychology research or a lot of other domains of research that are much better accepted. But one frustrating thing about psi phenomena is we don't really have a good theory on the science level for how they could happen. I mean, sort of mystical, woo-woo, spooky theories of psi exist, like everything is connected, everything is conscious. Fair enough, but they then explain too much, right? You need a theory that not only explains why these phenomena can happen, but that explains, why they're so limited and why we can't share all our thoughts and why we can't all levitate things around the room at will, right? So I mean, saying everything is conscious, everything is all one connected mind, the physical world is just a model which has its limits. Can't argue with that, absolutely, but yet, there are particularities to how these phenomena work and how they don't work, and we need to explain those as well, not just say that the phenomena are possible. So Rupert Sheldrake had a concept I think is part of this story, which is morphic resonance. And I read about this in the 80s. I mean, basically what morphic resonance says is patterns have a sort of uncanny tendency to persist and propagate. If a pattern occurs in one place in the universe, that pattern is then more likely to occur somewhere else in the universe. I mean, more likely than you would expect at random chance. And this basic phenomena can be understood to explain some psi phenomena in an interesting way. And I mean, Rupert is an experimentalist. He's done a bunch of experiments on things like, dogs that can tell when their owners are about to come home without any empirical data that is obvious, that would tell the dogs when the people were coming home, or people who get an email or a phone call and they can sense who's calling before they pick it up, and they're right much more often than chance would suggest. So Rupert has been doing experiments and all sorts of phenomena like this and explaining them using the notion of morphic resonance. What I thought was interesting was, among many interesting things about this, the morphic resonance principle is very similar to Lee Smolin's precedence principle in quantum mechanics, where what Smolin said is, well, if you assume the probability of an observation is higher if it's predicted by a simple model of past observations, then, this is basically what morphic resonance says, and he uses this to derive the Schrodinger equation in an alternative to the normal axiomatic derivations of quantum mechanics. But so far, Lee Smolin seems not pleased by the sort of conceptual harmony between his precedence principle and Sheldrake's morphic resonance. Like, quantum physics is weird, but psi phenomena are a step beyond. And while the majority of the world's population actually accepts that psi phenomena exist based on their own experiences, the experiences of their friends and families, the idea is still a bit controversial in the physics world. But it's not so far beyond the realm of science now to see how psi phenomena could have a biology and physics explanation, even though we don't have that explanation yet. I mean, there's the connection between side notions like morphic resonance and say Smolin's precedence principle. But then if you look at how the brain works, I mean, the brain has these neurons all connected to each other, and there's protein molecules that are doing the work, say, of transmitting the electricity from one neuron to another through a chemical synaptic junction. Now, protein molecules in the brain and elsewhere are often in critical states. They may well often be in states of quantum coherence, or sort of partial or weak quantum coherence. And so if the protein molecules that are helping transmit charge from one neuron to another are in a state of weak quantum coherence, I mean, that could be a way that weird stuff like Smolin's precedence principle, which gives an avenue for psi phenomena to pop up in quantum mechanics, to actually impact how the brain works. And there's a bunch of solid papers looking at how quantum dynamics may affect proteins in critical states. But then if you have, say, 5,000 proteins in the brain acting in a coordinated way, they can make a neuron fire. So you see a route where, okay, some variation on vanilla quantum mechanics, similar to precedence principles / morphic resonance, is causing 5,000 critical state protein molecules to behave in a coordinated way, which makes a neuron fire. And that causes a cascade of activity that puts the brain in a different state. All of a sudden, you can see how, funky, tweaked quantum mechanics, which enables psi phenomena, could be impacting the brain. And I mean, there's also water megamolecules in the brain. There's a lot we don't understand about the state of water in the brain and body. And the water megamolecules in the brain, which are just there in between the neurons and glia, but mediating, for example, the extracellular transmission of charge through the brain, these water megamolecules could be in a state of weak quantum coherence. We don't have a good way to measure this stuff now. And there's a lot that's not known about nuclear quantum effects in water. I mean, we know there's some weird quantum effects in the brain. Birds used wet quantum coherence for navigation, but we don't know the extent of it. Now, quantum effects in the brain themselves are not well documented beyond a few peculiar cases. Also, I'm not convinced vanilla quantum mechanics can explain psi phenomena, but maybe you tweak quantum mechanics a little bit along the lines of the precedence principle to explain psi phenomena, and then that tweak quantum mechanics connects with neurodynamics to explain psi. There's a very cool paper by Matthew Fisher arguing that phosphate atoms in the brain, their spins may be quantum non-locally coupled throughout the brain, giving a potential route to quantum cognition through phosphorylation operations on the proteins involved in neural function. He's now got some funding to explore that one empirically. So yeah, if I weren't occupied more than full time with building AGI, one thing I might be interested in doing is, animal studies on psychic power. Like stick a bunch of wires in the brains of animals, try to put them in situations where they'll do precognition, and try to figure out like what's the quantum biology peculiarities happening inside the brain of an animal when it does something psychic. So yeah, here's a cool paper by Fernando Alvarez on precognition with planarian worms. Like you have a bunch of planarian worms in a little tray, and they start wiggling around a lot right before they're randomly electrically shocked. But how can they know they're going to be randomly electrically shocked? It's precognition. Now the subtlety with this paper is they have a hard time telling if the planarians are psychic or if it's an experimenter effect, and the experimenter themselves is able to psychically tell when the planarians are going to get a random shock. And again, this is a subtle empirical and information theoretic question, how to tell psi on the part of the experimenter running the experiment from psi on the part of the experimental subject, be it a human or animal. But I think, with some care, we can work through all these things. I mean, and we can perhaps even work through the yet more complex and confusing phenomena like reincarnation, near-death experiences, all this stuff. The book Surviving Death by Leslie Kean, I'd strongly recommend, just in a very matter-of-fact way, going through data and experiences indicating, not necessarily that the stories of reincarnation or life after death from traditional religions are correct. In fact, I'm almost sure none of those stories are really correct, but that the phenomena that these religious stories are trying to explain, these phenomena are real. Like people's individual minds, have some existence and some impact on the world at points in time when their body is dead, right? And so that's very interesting. Exactly what it means or how it works, I don't know, and I'm not convinced anyone else knows. But I don't think we should just brush away huge amounts of data because we don't have a good theory. So yeah, that I wrote a review of Leslie Kean's book Surviving Death in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. It's shorter than the book if you want to just dip in. But no, so here's where things get a little crazy. Like suppose there is some broader universe in which our individual minds are still out there, sort of imprinted and doing something, even at points in time when our bodies are dead. Then is that a technology that we can master? I mean, can we build reincarnation machines? Can we figure out how to suck the mind imprint of people who are now dead out of this broader universe? I mean, it seems insane, but on the other hand, flying into outer space seemed insane to people a thousand years ago. And I remember 20 years ago, many austere, august scientists told me that face recognition was too hard for computers to do, and now it's like in a camera on every street corner in Shenzhen. So we're in a generation when the strange and wacky becomes the commoditized remarkably rapidly. And the conceptual and mathematical picture I've been using to think about all this stuff is what I call the Eurycosm, like a wider world of which our physical world is a subset. And everyone knows now string theory in modern physics looks at our four-dimensional space-time continuum as being embedded in, say, an 11 or 26-dimensional universe. In modern physics, these 11 or 26-dimensional universes, I mean, they may be rolled up in very little tubes, and they're just viewed as enacting some complex differential equations. What I'm saying is maybe we want to view this higher dimensional containing space as being in some ways mind-like, rather than just reductionistically physics-like. And yeah, if you look up Euryphysics online, you can find stuff I've written about this. It's an unusual word, so just Google the word is good enough. And of course, this sort of idea for modeling psi is pretty old, and for an obvious reason, right? Like if we want to talk about, say, ESP between me and some other guy, well, me and the other guy may be 10,000 miles away in this four-dimensional space-time continuum. But if you view the 4D space-time continuum of the physical universe as being embedded in some higher dimensional space, I mean, then you could say, well, maybe me and that other guy are right next to each other in that higher dimensional space, right? I mean, just like two points that are quite distant on a two-dimensional piece of paper. They may be far away in the two-dimensional piece of paper, but they're right next to each other in three dimensions when you fold up the piece of paper. So, I mean, higher dimensional models of psi go way back, but again, you need a good model that doesn't explain too much, that explains the limitations of these phenomena, as well as the miraculous aspects of them. So one interesting perspective is if we view the physical universe as Turing computational, which it seems to be according to the known equations of, quantum mechanics, the standard model of general relativity, physical universe may be Turing computable in the sense of standard digital computers today, but maybe the Eurycosm, the wider world containing the physical universe, is hyper computational and can do computing that looks like it would require infinite power from the perspective of this universe. And that starts to seem like a god in a sense. I mean, a hypercomputer could do in an instant what would take us infinitely long. But to call it a god is a bit misleading, in that traditional religions view this infinite power as being anthropomorphized. I mean, they view gods as having personalities and motives and emotions and goals and so forth. And that's not necessarily warranted. I mean, it could be. The evidence seems not strong at the moment. What we're talking about here is just a wider world that has a capability for processing information and creating pattern, which is infinite relative to what's possible in the physical universe as currently known. And then you can ask, is morphic resonance, as Sheldrake has identified, part of the dynamic of the Eurycosm outside this physical universe? Like our patterns or entities or minds outside this physical universe in the Eurycosm, do they have the property that, once they develop some pattern along some timeline, other related patterns are more likely to occur along that timeline? Where, of course, timelines in this Eurycosmic perspective, timelines can be viewed as just another kind of pattern, right? And so becomes quite subtle. Reincarnation, survival after death type phenomena. There may be interactions between the spatiotemporally restricted patterns constituting an individual and the Eurycosmic patterns constituting an individual that live in this higher dimensional realm, not tied to this physical universe. And I mean, if you have morphic resonance between patterns in the physical world and patterns in the wider, higher dimensional Eurycosm, that morphic resonance could give symbolism actual power, as Jung and then all the shamanic traditions had posited. I mean, there can be causal power and synchronistic power associated with symbols in a way that pure physics does not explain, right? And there's all sorts of funky common symbolic patterns you can look at between the I Ching and DNA. And I mean, you can find logical explanations and coincidental explanations for these things. And you can also look at from a morphic resonance point of view, like, well, once a pattern occurs one place, it's more likely to pop up some other place, and the pattern itself has some synchronistic force because of morphic resonance in the higher dimensional containing universe, right? And there are certain mathematical structures that pop up all over our physical and mental universe with uncanny regularity. I mean, the division algebras, octonions, quaternions are one example, albeit only recognizable to mathematicians. But these math structures underlie the geometric forms that we see on psychedelics, as well as underlying fundamental equations of physics and the brain, as Henry Markram showed that algebraic topological structures of this nature are present in neural connectivity. Now you can look at the arising of these same mathematical and geometric structures in physics, in psychedelics, and in the brain, as you can look at that from a reductionist point of view, and you can make a story there. On the other hand, you can also look at it from a morphic resonance point of view and say, once the pattern pops up one place in the universe, the mind-like nature of the broader Eurycosm is making it more likely to occur in different places in our universe, right? And that maybe that when we meditate or trip and get into more of a non-dual state of consciousness, I mean, maybe we are morphically resonating more so with the Eurycosm beyond this four-dimensional space-time continuum, which is a different way of looking at the so-called hard problem of consciousness, which is like how is our conscious experience connected to stuff happening in our brain? Because you can look at, there's nonlinear feedback loops and dynamics occurring in the brain, and then there's these paradoxical non-foundational loops of sets containing themselves as elements that correspond to conscious experience in the Eurycosmic pattern space beyond our space-time continuum, and sort of resonance between the nonlinear dynamical loops in the brain and the reflective, recurrent consciousness patterns in the Eurycosm. This is one thing that can give conscious experience its peculiar characteristics. So I'm gonna wrap this up shortly, so we have time for a few questions. I think this goofy picture summarizes some aspects of what I'm talking about. There can be a broader world beyond our physical world, and you can have sort of synchronistic pattern connections between the broader world, the Eurycosm, and the physical world, and these can have causal impact and synchronistic impact in our physical world. Now let me see if I can kill the screen sharing. Stop sharing. So, final thing I want to say before having a couple questions. So, most people who share these sort of wacky points of view on what is consciousness and what is the mind, and who think that the mind isn't only physical and there are broader aspects to experience, and the psi phenomena in the quantum brain may be part of our experience. Most people who share these crazy ideas don't think you can build an artificial general intelligence by programming a digital computer. They think you'll need a quantum computer or a bunch of neurons in a vat, or you'll need to do some mystical incantation over your computer to get it to be intelligent or something. Now my view is more like there is magic there, but it's sort of comes for free. So I think if you program the right structures in your digital computer network, then the patterns and structures in your digital computer program, they automatically morphically resonate with stuff in the Eurycosm and the broader universe. Like, it's not that I think the conscious experience is there in the computer program any more than I think my conscious experience is in the gook and slime inside my head. I think that the patterns of electrical and chemical flow in the brain and the patterns of electrical flow in the computer RAM and processor, I think these patterns connect with and inspire and synchronize with consciousness that exists beyond the physical world. So this is a perspective that seems to annoy and alienate almost everybody, which is what makes me feel like it has some chance of being correct, because it's too crazy. It's too crazy for the typical AI people and scientists, but yet it gives too much power to engineering for most of the people who are into mystical stuff. And however, yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it. And I think that, as weird as it sounds, a lot of the stuff is going to be necessary to think about, like in between artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence. Like, the singularity isn't just going to be faster smartphones for everyone and immortality pills and a pain-killing switch on your head. The singularity is going to open up whole new ways of experiencing ourselves in the world, and whole whole new domains of being, and it's going to make our current universe seem as limited as we now think the universe of a cockroach is, or something. So we're going to see our minds open like so fucking wide that right now we cannot begin to conceive what we're going to be experiencing once the singularity hits. And what I've talked about now, obviously, is just barely scratching the surface.
Fabulous, Ben. This is just amazing stuff. I'd love to ask you a few questions. You finished on the singularity about how our brains are going to be so big relative to our experience. Our consciousness is going to be so big relative to what it is now. It's going to be like a cockroach versus a human. What could we be doing to prepare for the singularity? My thought is I want to be as healthy as possible, so that way, if my brain gets merged with technology, or my body is working pretty well. So I'm thinking like stem cells. I'm thinking intermittent fasting to keep my body young.
The truth is we don't know. Like, we might not have to do anything, because if you get a reincarnation machine, it doesn't matter. The post-singularity super AI can just bring you all back anyway, right? But we really don't know. And if you want to be a little bit conservative, then yeah, keeping alive would be one useful thing to do, right? I mean, the odds of participating in the singularity, based on what we know now, are a bit higher if we are alive at that time, and not with profound neural degeneration or anything. So yeah, certainly a healthy diet, exercise, intermittent fasting, and optimistic attitude. I mean, all these things increase your odds of survival. And I mean, I didn't talk about it here, but I've done a lot of work on applying AI to longevity therapy, and try to analyze like genomic and proteomic data to make new therapies that can prolong life, right? And I mean, I think in the big picture, of course, none of us individually matter. Like, it's a collective cultural mind of humanity that really matters. So I mean, if I'm dead before the singularity happens, I mean, the singularity doesn't care, and it's all going to unfold anyway. But I mean, nonetheless, in my trivial little individual way, I would rather survive to experience it, right? I think the important thing really is to do what we can to bias the course of development toward a more positive technological and consciousness singularity. I mean, it is almost inevitable by now that we're going to create some massively superhuman mind, which goes far beyond humanity in capability and intelligence and experience. But
that's scary for a lot of people. I mean, when you said,
yeah, it could happen in a lot of ways, right? Like, it could happen in a way that almost everyone is happy all throughout, or it could happen by, for example, killing off all humans and replacing them by superhuman super beings. And in the long run, you could argue it doesn't really matter. Like, how much do we care now about, how tough was the transition from hunter-gatherer life to agricultural civilization in human history, right? Like, how hard was that on the hunter-gatherers? How many of them died? How many of them were depressed? Or how many of them had a good time through the transition from hunter-gatherer to agrarian life? Like, we pretty much don't give a fuck at this point, right? But at the time, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you care a lot how that transition is for you and your family. But of course, now, 10,000 years later, it's irrelevant to us, right? So I think, the future is extremely optimistic for mind and life in general. It's going to flourish and explode amazingly beyond its current limits. The smoothness of the transition may not matter in the cosmic picture, but it matters to us. And it's also something we can probably guide. I mean, I think if there's an attitude of love and cooperation and positivity on the planet, we're much more likely to steer the singularity toward a smooth transition from the human to the transhuman era. And if we have, stupidity, closed-mindedness, strife, bad mental energy, we're much more likely to see a rocky and insane and unpleasant transition with, death, destruction, warfare, and psychic pain. And if you look at the world right now, I mean, you can make your own inference about which path is more likely. I don't think it's determined, but
Yeah, so how do we make sure that the machines don't kill us? Like, should I be thanking Siri when Siri says your destination's ahead? Should I be like, thank you, Siri? Or should I be clipping these, these news clippings of, a human building a shell for a tortoise who got burned in a fire to show compassion for animals?
You shouldn't be worried about Siri killing you. You should be worried about some human asshole using machines to kill you. Right? I mean, because that's palpable, right? I mean, that's right now. Big companies are taking everyone's data and they're using it. They're using it in part to program everyone's mind through mass media. And part of what they're programming people for is to elect a bunch of fascists in charge of major nations who are then locking kids in cages, right? So I mean.
Do you mean to tell me these people running for office aren't the most competent, loving, amazing people that we could put up for the human race?
I mean, maybe they have 5 times the IQ of you and me, and they're playing a very subtle con game. But I'm betting against it at the moment, right? Yeah. I mean, they could be reptilians too. There's a lot of possibilities, but yeah, I mean, if you look at how information and resources are organized on the planet now, it's worrisome when, take the point of view, okay, there's this intelligent species on Earth building technologies, and we're, say, 1 to 5 decades from creating machines that are massively more intelligent than we are, with either amazing positive or amazing destructive potential for us. You would think we would be approaching the problem in some rational and coordinated way and thinking like, well, how can we do this in a way that will benefit everyone the best while minimizing the risks? But instead, most AI development is oriented either toward selling people stuff, killing people, or shafting them from their money through financial prediction. And the fundamental research on AI is done around the margins of selling, killing, spying, and gambling, right? So it is not the most obvious recipe for a broadly beneficial and compassionate singularity.
So because the AI now is focused on the stock market, is focused on selling stuff, and is focused on war, if the future AI is based on this might not be a good way to start the AI
One would think so. I mean, of course, rotten parents can sometimes give birth to amazing, wonderful kids, right? So you don't have you don't have a guarantee of a bad outcome in that context, but we seem to be biasing the mind of our baby global AI brain in a highly unwise way, right? I mean, and you could do otherwise. You could be breeding the early stage AIs to do things like, elder care, child care, medical research, to distribute food and medicine in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, we could be using AI in quite other ways. And I mean, this stuff gets even scarier if you believe some of this morphic resonance and psi type stuff that I was talking about a few minutes ago, right? Because then we're projecting these highly negative archetypes of mind states and social relational patterns, and we're imprinting them upon the minds of the AGIs that we are working toward. And I mean,
oh no,
compassion and positive energy on the planet right now, but the way our the tech industry and our socioeconomic structures are organized, like that amazing positive loving energy on the planet is not primarily what's guiding the development of AI and other advanced technologies, right? And that's sort of a structure of society type
Yeah.
issue. And even like Burning Man, the Burning Man festival, right? I mean, you have a lot of people from Silicon Valley go to Burning Man and drop acid and party and love and have a good time, and then go back the rest of the year coding AI that is programming people's brains for mindless consumerism and for getting Trump elected, right? So, I mean, individual people aren't all good or all bad. I mean, almost none of us are. But it seems like at the moment, the loving, beneficial parts of individual and collective human psyche are not that well connected to the parts of individual and collective psyche that are building the AIs that are going to turn into AGIs, right? And that's a problem. I've been trying to solve that problem, but I'm one guy. My hope is that as a younger generation moves into the AI space, there'll be more and more people who understand the critical value of bringing, like,
can you share a little bit about your project without name dropping, because you believe that blockchain and making AI accessible for everyone is going to keep it accessible for everyone and good and bring good to the world, rather than letting a few large companies and countries control it. You want it to be a general good of the world. Can you talk a little bit about your blockchain project?
Decentralized technology, blockchain is one useful tool there, right? Because that lets you make a decentralized network of computers, realizing, for example, an AGI system or another complex AI system, which is not owned or controlled by any one party. Which means, if the cops or the army wants to shut you down, they can't, because the thing it lives everywhere, like Linux or BitTorrent, right? So that's certainly one key aspect to it. But of course, that can't really do its job if 99% of AI PhDs are working for 10 large oppressive companies that are operating in close coordination with national surveillance agencies, right? So the software infrastructure for decentralized control is important, but the culture of the human networks using the software is probably even more important.
And so if people are interested in learning about how to support blockchain, AI, and that sort of thing, what can someone do? Where could they go to learn more about helping make AI more of a communal good of the world?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is hard to say without breaking your rule against name dropping. So I'll just say go to singularitynet.io and you can sign up for a newsletter. There's a bunch of blog posts there. But actually, my name is unusual. There's not that many Ben Goertzels in the world. So if you just search Ben Goertzel on YouTube, you will find a large number of videos of me talking about AI, AGI, decentralization, life extension, and all kinds of good stuff.
Terrific. You mentioned psychedelics, and you mentioned psychedelics and its link to science, and kind of like people in a psychedelic state will say they see sacred geometry, right? They'll look at a cloud and the cloud will pixelate into like triangles or hexagons or something cool like that. And you said this is related to something else in science. I didn't quite understand.
Those same geometric structures are key in physics. I mean, the geometric structures are implicit in the equations of fundamental physics, and I mean, of course, they're also there in the algebraic geometry structure in the human brain. So these algebra structures are popping up everywhere, and when we make abstract math models of how language and thinking work, you see forms of these same structures that one perceives visually when I'm in psychedelic experiences. Yeah, those of us working on AGI have thought a lot about what will the psychedelic experiences of AGIs be, right? That's going to be quite interesting to have a digital mind with a very different cognitive architecture, trip out based on us figuring out how to make psychedelics for its own mind implementation, and then compare notes, right? Like, or what would it be like to share a trip with the AGI? Like, often on psychedelics, you get a feeling of like second person experience, right? Like you and the minds of other people are kind of fusing into one shared experience. And I think it'll be interesting to measure that with brain computer interfacing, when you can connect one person's brain to another, and then even a third person, they can watch the sharing of experience between two people. But what if AGIs and intelligent robots get into the picture, right? I mean, can you really get that shared space of common consciousness with the AGI, and then what would it feel like? And could you measure that with instrumentation in human brains and inside the AGI? And that could be something that also teaches you something about psi and paranormal phenomena, right? Because there's a connection between shared psychedelic states and psi phenomena, which is often reported in experience, but has been hard to study for a combination of reasons.
Yeah, I remember there was a time where I was in an enhanced state and I thought a really negative something, and then a waiter dropped a tray of dishes like a second later. And I thought, did I cause that, or did I premonition that, or was that just a random thing? But that really struck me as like, wow, that was fascinating that those two.
Yeah, I mean, so that happens, and that's these are part of these types of phenomena are part of every shamanic tradition, and they've been hard to study, both because like getting tripping people to follow experimental protocols is almost a non-starter, apart from legal aspects of those studies, right? On the other hand, if you have an AGI and you could get the AGI to participate in, psychedelic states and paranormal phenomena, I mean, you could instrument and study the AGI in ways you can't do with human beings, right? Because the human brain is annoying to stick a bunch of wires into, but it's much easier to monitor the state of an engineered mind. So it may be like, if you can create psychic tripping AGIs, then like studying their brains might lead us to a real science of these phenomena.
Now, what can we conclude? Because the shapes that people see during a psychedelic journey, that those shapes are part of physics. What can we conclude about that? Can we say, therefore, psychedelics are part of nature, therefore psychedelics are an enhanced state that allows us to see nature?
I would say we don't have a solid conclusion from that, right? And by the way, if people don't know the website Qualia Computing, there's amazing images and theoretical papers on this sacred geometry that people experience on psychedelics. Because you could approach this in a purely reductionist way, and I mean, you can look at the patterns of excitation in cortical sheets in the brain, and you could look at it in a purely reductionist way that, well, this is just the mathematical pattern in a cortical sheet resembles the mathematical pattern in a lattice of particles. And I mean, that's it's not necessarily mystical that the same math would pop up in different places, or there could be a funkier explanation, right? I mean, it could be that these sacred geometric patterns are sort of patterns in the mind space outside the universe, which are sort of synchronizing on different levels in our universe in a way that isn't just sort of a reductionist commonality of the pattern emerging in different substrates. And I would say, my heart and intuition gravitate toward the spookier explanation, but I mean, we don't. It's a research question, right? And it's an interesting research question.
What do you think about the shared mind? So calculus was discovered, if I'm correct, by two different people at the same time. right? So it was Newton, and there was, I think it was some Arab, I think he was Muslim, discovered at the same time, independent of each other. And then like pyramid structures were built around the world, independent of each other, without contact. Very similar structures were built. Like, is the
Yeah,
thought
this is exact. I mean, I think the common discovery of calculus by Newton and Leibniz is not that. That's not that spooky, because math was sort of at the right level for it. But there's a lot of freaky examples of synchronistic development, right? And these are among the many things that led Sheldrake to come up with the morphic resonance concept, that once a pattern starts occurring somewhere in the universe, it's more likely to occur somewhere else in the universe. And I mean, these historical examples, you could always come up with a lot of different explanations. But I think you can study this in the laboratory also. And yeah, Rupert Sheldrake came up with some some quite interesting ways to study it. I mean, like if you experiment with, say, a Bose-Einstein condensate, which is a complex like physical brew that exists only at a very, very cold temperature, say below the background radiation temperature of the universe, right? So if you create these physical brews that exist at such a cold level, it's probably never existed in the universe before, then you could try to make the same brew again and see if the chemical reactions happen faster. Because then you're doing something that, according to physics, you did it for the first time ever. And then you can test what happens when you do it for the second time ever, and the third time ever. And yeah, no one has done those experiments yet. But there are ways to bring this notion of morphic resonance within the domain of experimental science that would be plausible to do right now, and which is super interesting. Now, I don't think we need this weird shit to create AGI, but if you have it, you may be able to rapidly progress towards super intelligence, right? I mean, even if the first AGI is on a digital computer network, if you have some funky like femtocomputer network leveraging the modifications of quantum mechanics that we've found to explain psi phenomena, I mean, then that may rapidly exceed the intelligence of your initial AGI on a digital computer network.
Did you share a great source for the morphic resonance? I have some very intelligent friends who don't believe in stuff they can't touch. They're more in the scientific realm, but they're, I'll believe it when I see it realm. But there's great data, like you mentioned, the dogs go into the doors faster. I heard a story of horses will pass the word along in a barn that the vet's coming. And the reason is that they're hiding. But how did they know that the vet was coming? Because the horses aren't using a shared language to share this information across a barn, but somehow they're all hiding when the vet arrives. Is there a good resource to show somebody to kind of open their mind to these phenomena?
If you look at the website of Rupert Sheldrake, who is the guy who invented the notion of morphic resonance, he has a large number of books and papers on this. He also had a chapter in the book I edited, The Evidence for Psi, which reviewed some of his work. So I mean, I was a real skeptic of this stuff for a while. Even after having direct experiences of it, I discounted my own experience because it didn't seem to match the scientific worldview that I had. Then, after just reading a whole lot of data tables and looking at a lot of experiments, then going and talking to the researchers, I'm like, well, actually, okay, this data is annoying and complicated and it's not perfect, but science is often like that. And on the other hand, why actually was I completely dismissing an experience and like writing it off as what, temporary insanity or something, right? Because once you set aside like materialist dogma, this shit actually happens all the time, and the majority of people in the world actually know it. And the fact that science doesn't give us a solid explanation yet isn't because the phenomena aren't there. I mean, it's because science isn't complete, and that's well known. Like every 50 years, physics completely throws out its foundations and revolutionizes itself, right? So that, I mean, the science that the first AGI discovers is going to be way, way, way beyond what we're thinking now. So that all the ideas we have now are going to seem archaic, the way that the physics of the ancient Greeks seems to us now, or something.
See, that's amazing to me when I think about the future. I'm open to a future where, you know, I know even less than I do now, and the world's a lot bigger right now. This reminds me kind of like the idea of a DMT trip, right? It's like
Yeah.
the level of consciousness during that time it's really difficult to explain to someone in a normal state. And if right now we're at the cockroach level, and that's like, you know, an advanced, let's say the AGI level in the future, what on earth is life going to be like if that like becomes like the norm, like that state of consciousness of being in a DMT
No, well,
trip? And, like,
that's this interesting and sobering thought, right? So if you take DMT, you you're in a universe of infinitely greater intelligence, pattern, wisdom, knowledge, then like you're back in your stupid old human body with all your constraints and concerns, and you know that there was or is this domain so close, which is so much more informative and rich and patterned and so much deeper, and that you can't get there with your current mind structure. Either that or that delusion has been implanted in your brain, right? And then it's quite hard to know what to do with that while existing within this space-time continuum, right? Because I mean, it gives you a different view of your life, but it's not easily actionable knowledge, right? Now, if that level of intelligence that you experience in a DMT trip, if that level of intelligence is like there in your virtual assistant on your smartphone or something, I mean, you still can't understand what the fuck it is, right? I mean, you still can't mind meld with it within your human form, even if you could use, you know, the inventions or answers to questions that it spat out. So you're going to have a choice, like fuse your mind with that incomprehensible transhuman superintelligence, thus losing everything you hold dear, like yourself and will and your attachments to everything, and just plunging into something much broader and larger, which will make all your current loves and passions and concerns seem irrelevant, right? Like specks among some of the other specks, or remain in current human form or some slightly upgraded version, benefiting from some of the fruits of the super intelligences, but never really comprehending them, right? And I mean, in a way, that may be the same position that we're in right now, but it will be a lot more explicit in that sort of circumstance. Like maybe there's a button on your phone, you can push it, and all of a sudden you're vaporized and you become one with the hypercomputing supermind, right?
yeah. Do you think it'll be possible in the future to bring back geniuses from the past? So like Mozart, I love Mozart's music. Is it going to be possible to take his music, take some of his biographies, put them all together, and then recreate an AI, and then maybe take psychedelics with that AI, and then have him play, you know,
I mean,
some Mozart music?
my guess would be probably, yeah. Like you have the constraint of being a human brain that created that music. In a way, there's probably only one human brain and body that would have created exactly that corpus of music. So a sufficiently intelligent AGI system should be able to reverse engineer what would have been the one brain that would create exactly that music. So yeah, we can all jam with Mozart, Hendrix, and Thelonious Monk all at once, right? Huh?
That would be an amazing drum circle to hang out with.
Yeah.
Do
I
you
guess
think
yeah, we need Billy Cobham on drums. I mean, we can you can sculpt whatever you want, right? I mean,
now for the computing power for this? I know you've said in past interviews it's between like 5 and 15 years away, something like that. Do you think quantum computing is going to be necessary? Because
I don't think it will be necessary, but I think it will be very cool, right? I mean, I think
Very cool, because it's going to be like, almost 0 degrees, almost absolute zero.
it may not be by the time we get something that works well, right? Yeah, but some versions are like that.
I mean, that's crazy to me. You got these computers that are almost absolute zero, and that's the temperature they run at. And then that to me is just astounding, to keep an environment that cold.
Yeah, but I mean, given that most computing is done on server farms now, it's not like you need the liquid helium on your desk or in your pocket, right? So, but yeah, I think that my best intuition at the moment is that we can get human level AGI on purely digital computers without needing quantum computing. On the other hand, clearly there's some parts of cognition that quantum computers will be able to do much, much better than digital computers, right? So, I mean, I think, again, maybe that's part of the journey from AGI to ASA, artificial superintelligence. And it might be that AGI is what figures out how to make really good use of quantum computers. Because right now, I mean, quantum computing hardware is still early stage, but there's also the issue that we don't know that many quantum computing algorithms yet. It's just hard for the human brain to figure out algorithms that leverage the unique capabilities of quantum computers, because we're not quantum thinkers, right? But if you have an AGI that has direct sensors at the quantum level, that AGI will have the same intuitive feel for the quantum world that we do for the world of like sticks and rocks and stuff that we're able to directly sense and interact with. So, wow. Yeah, then that AGI may figure out how to leverage quantum computing way better than we can, write new quantum computing algorithms to fuel the next level of its software, and that's where you're getting the hard takeoff from the AGI to the super AI.
And are you familiar with Paul Stamets' work and his work with mycelium and the intelligence below the ground?
No, actually, I'm not.
So Paul Stamets is an expert. He's actually speaking. I think he's speaking on Wednesday. He's devoted his life's work to the power of the mushroom and the power of the mushroom to regrow new brain cells. So he talks about lion's mane. He talks some about psilocybin. He talks about the DEA trying to set him up and arrest him, and him foiling their plans. But he talks about the research of connecting mycelium is the largest organism in the world, because it's underground, and some of it's like single cell thin, but right. It's many square miles underneath the earth. It's one organism. And he said I don't know how this was done. You'll probably have a better idea than I do. Basically, they were able to connect to the intelligence of this mycelium that's massive underneath the ground, but that's very, very primitive. Because and what they did was they were ask it to route itself around like London, or design the London tubes in a certain way. And basically it did it in a more effective way than the best humans and or computers were able to do it. It was a physical problem of solving geography and routing traffic, something like that. And the mushroom, the mycelium, was able to do it more effectively than the humans or the humans plus computers.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Is that cool?
I will be curious to see that. I mean, I know there's DNA computing, which is more artificial and is currently very slow. And there's also fascinating research on the collective cognition in bacterial colonies, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of intelligence in seemingly simple biology systems, and maybe in our own like gut microbiomes even
yeah.
Right? So there's a lot more intelligence in many parts of the universe than we can perceive. Now, if you wanted to go all Terence McKenna, you would somehow associate the problem-solving capability of the mycelium with the psychedelic, activity of the mushroom. But of course, we can't quite make that connection on the science level yet. But it's all thought provoking. Yeah.
How important do you think? So psychedelics are going to become legal probably in the next 20 years. In Denver, psilocybin is decriminalized, so we're moving in that direction. How important do you think psychedelics and understanding psychedelics to use them to facilitate creativity and problem solving. How important do you think that's going to be in the future, especially with something as visionary as AI? I mean, you had the vision years ago when people thought you were crazy talking about AI. Now people are taking seriously, but that's a visionary thing to project out in the future 30, 40, 50 years and say, it's going to look like this. People are going to have a computer in their pocket. They're going to work from their home. And,
you know, if somehow our society and culture doesn't screw it up, then psychedelics have amazing potential to, you know, bring out the love and compassion and collective positivity and creativity of humanity. So that could be a critical aspect that guides us toward a positive technological singularity, rather than toward a technological singularity that's great for the emerging supermind, but not so great for most humans, right? Now, of course, like any complex thing, psychedelics could be used in positive or negative ways, right? So we have to see how it actually develops within culture. But because I mean, I've seen psychedelics used for control and oppression on certain occasions, as well as used for creativity and opening of minds. But yeah, I think if it's done right and the culture incorporates it the right way, I mean, that could end up being a critical factor in guiding the singularity in a positive direction.
if you were speaking to someone not recommending psychedelics, but someone who wanted to learn more, for example, my parents, when I shared some things with them, they became much more open to the idea that, you know, these things that they were told for their whole lives were evil and dangerous and, you know, ungodly and, you know, connected with really, really awful things. But instead, these are actually like a tool of creativity. A lot of really smart people use them in Silicon Valley to do problem solving. A lot of, you know, artists use them for inspiration. And these are just a great way to connect with yourself and connect with consciousness. But without expressly giving any recommendations for using psychedelics, what would you say to somebody who, let's say a baby boomer generation who's curious about the use of psychedelics to, you know, create new neural connections, have new experiences, or just, you know, turn up the volume on their life with you know, open up these new pathways. You know, what information do you think would be valuable for them to know about psychedelics and the brain?
You know, I don't have a good like book recommendation on the tip of my tongue. Maybe you do actually. Huh?
I don't have a book on it. I just, you know, you're a very smart person. You have you know, experiences with people who may have ventured here. I'm just trying to understand what would someone need to hear to understand that these could be
I mean,
good, bad,
I think
a good tool.
A couple books that influenced me a lot on this, which are, whether they're the best thing to recommend to this or that person, I don't know, but Stan Grof's work on LSD psychotherapy in the 1960s was really, really interesting. And I mean, he was before LSD was made illegal in '66, the year I was born. I mean, he was using LSD in psychotherapy with schizophrenic, bipolar, alcoholic, all sorts of people with amazing positive impact. And he sort of recorded all this with scientific precision, but also tied it in with you know, Jungian archetypes and various spiritual phenomena. That was then Terence McKenna's book, Food of the Gods, is an interesting introduction. I mean, it's not as crazy and exploratory as some of his writing. Basically, he's going through how drugs and mind-altering substances, from beer to coffee to cocaine to psychedelics, have shaped humanity through its whole history, right? And they've been a key part of how our modern state of consciousness evolved, and the symbiosis between our bodies and these mind-altering substances is really part of who we are as a culture. And I think, yeah, Terence's book, Food of the Gods, makes that point in a pretty clear way, even though some of Terence McKenna's other writings I would not
Yeah.
recommend as introductory as
Yeah.
he could go pretty far out there. I love it, but you have to take it in the right way.
Yeah. Totally. Can I ask you a question about Go, the game Go? So I was so amazed that I heard that you were able to create a supercomputer, or machine, or program that was able to like play Go, when it has almost like infinite possibilities. Can you talk a little bit about that? So
Well,
like
that
chess.
wasn't me who did that. That was Google DeepMind who did that. So, which was cool. I mean that's
Was your son involved in the
AlphaGo.
project? Am I misremembering that?
I had nothing at all to do with that project. Yeah.
Okay. So
But
I guess
I did admire and appreciate it, like you and everyone else. I mean, it's very cool. I mean, it really, AlphaGo played Go vastly better than any human being, and did it in a very different way than any human being, right? So, I mean, it's not conceptually thinking, it's iterating through a massive number of possibilities and simulating many billions of games to learn patterns of what are winning strategies. But what's cool is it takes approaches that no human ever would have thought to do. Like, it does things that look completely ridiculous and stupid, and then it wins, and you're like scratching your heads to analyze like how the hell did it do that, right? So it is quite fascinating. I mean, I think the AI approach there definitely exploits the fact that it's like a 19 by 19 world. Like, you can't take that kind of approach to solve problems in like politics or supply chain or war or something, because the game board is too big, right? But so I'm not sure AlphaGo is on the path to AGI, but it's incredible. Yeah, I mean that blew the minds of every Korean person. Like that single-handedly made the country of Korea embrace AI and made them allocate huge funding to it, because it was a Korean guy, Ali Sedal, who was beaten by AlphaGo.
Okay. Because it was thought that Go had so many moves, it was impossible to do AI with, versus chess. There's a finite number, right, each turn. But Go, there's almost an infinite, not an infinite, but there's a very
It's
large
not an
number
infinite
of
number,
possibilities.
right? I mean, it's more than chess, but it's not as many as in everyday life, right? And so the computers got faster and faster, and new algorithms were developed. And it does need different approach. Go needs a different approach than chess, but I think everyday human life will need a different approach than either Go or chess from an AI perspective.
Fascinating. This has been so great. Is there anything else you want to share? You talked a fair amount about psi, and you mentioned psychedelics. Is there anything else that we didn't cover or you didn't share on that you wanted to
No,
touch?
I think I mean, there's a lot of things we didn't cover, but we've gone over a lot of fascinating ground, and it's fun to talk about this stuff from some different angles than the sort of pure computer science algorithm blockchain approach I'm usually taking. So I've not nearly as good a time as if I'd been to Camp Mystic face to face, I'm sure.
Do
But
you have any intention to come to Burning Man next year?
yeah, maybe I will. I bizarrely, I've never been to Burning Man. I've just been living overseas most of the time. It's been a long way away. Although I lived in Nevada when Burning Man started, and I was too lazy to drive up from Vegas to the
Your hat you'd fit right in with Burning Man.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of Burning Man type experiences and other festivals and stuff, but yeah, I've got to make it to Burning Man eventually.
Yeah, I'd be honored to host you. Our camp, we only allow people to come in who have been vetted by another camp member, and I'd love to sponsor you for if you wanted to come, or if you just want to come hang out. It'd be great to see you. This is one of our psychedelic pieces of art that one of our camp members helped. He commissioned it and helped design it. And so our camp is a mixture of art and music and transformational talks like this. you know, Burning Man's kind of like the DMT trip in that, you know, it's a short period of time and you get so much, you get such a big download and you're like, well, shit, what the hell do I do with all this?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you go to 5 workshops a day and then, you know, you go out at night and you have some amazing conversations. Then you go back to what we call the default world. It's like, well, what do I do with all that? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, there's so much to receive in such a short period of time. Oh, if you're interested in Paul Stamets' talk, the mushroom expert, he's at 11 a.m. PST on Wednesday.
Okay.
And so you can check it
Cool.
here, or you can log into one of the other different one of the universes, the Mystic Verse, the Infinite Playa. I would start with those two, but each one of them has a different take on how to experience Burning Man virtually, which is going to be really cool. It's not just going to be a bunch of Zooms. You're actually going to be like driving around a bicycle in the dust, and you'll see a giant structure, and then you'll go like check it out and see, wow, someone put some giant hands here in the middle of the desert. And then you go hop on an art car that spits fire, and you'll be playing music and people will be dancing. So there'll be a way to experience it in all these different universes that are available right now.
Cool. I will check it out. All right. Yeah.
Fabulous. Ben, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your expertise, and thank you for what you're doing in the world. A couple of years ago, I was afraid of the AI, of AGI, because I was like, who is this going to be the Matrix, right? That's the thought, right? Is this going to be the Matrix where we're just batteries to these computers? And listening to your talks and getting a deeper understanding of it, I have much more confidence, much more faith that we can breed compassion, and that that AGI can be a great service to humanity and really free up a lot of our energy so we can have more joy and love and happiness in the world, and less pain, and also greater creativity. And so thank you for helping unplug me from that fear matrix into the possibility matrix.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me, and thanks for all your questions. It's been some cool give and take. So I will definitely see you at the physical Camp Mystic one of these years before too long, anyway. So yeah.
Fabulous. Look forward to it. Thanks so much, Ben.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.